Hey everyone, Shaun Stevenson here, author of the Throne series, and today I'm counting down my top 10 favorite fiction books of the year. So these are all from 2023 books that I read. These are all just my opinion. There's nothing to say, that one book was worse than another, or if a book didn't make my top 10. This was actually a very hard list to make. I hemmed and I hawed quite a bit. Let's get right into this and start off with my top 10 favorite fiction books that I read during 2023. Number 10 was Indiana Jones and the Genesis Deluge. Believe it or not, this is not the only book I read this year about Noah's Ark and an archaeological expedition to find it. But this was my favorite of those that I read this year. The Indiana Jones book series is a prequel series to the trilogy of films, starting with Raiders of the Lost Ark. So this one, it takes place way before Raiders of the Lost Ark, the film. And in this book by Rob McGregor, Indiana Jones is on the quest to see if the Ark is real. There are some very interesting religious pieces to this book that, as a person who is a pastor and a person who is, into theology and history and all of these sorts of things, it was interesting to read the perspective and to see the different things that are being said about the Noah's Ark story, the Genesis Deluge or flood. So Indiana Jones is on the trail of the Ark, not the Ark of the Covenant, but Noah's Ark, and trying to find it, and it gets mixed up in all these different adventures throughout the book. I will say it was a very quick read. This one moves along really quickly, and it was a lot of fun. It's that mass market paperback kind of style from the 90s, and I really enjoyed this one. It was a good read. I enjoyed it. So that's number 10, Indiana Jones and the Genesis Deluge, book number 4 in the Indiana Jones prequel series. And then book number 9, this one took me a little while to decide, but I landed on Tales from Adventureland, book number 1, The Key Master's Quest. And this book, it's a great little hardback type style with the deckled edge paging. And this book is all about a kid who finds out that he is the new key master who has all the keys to different secret hidden treasures around the world. And there's 3 books in the series. It's a little trilogy by Jason Lethko. And in each book, it kind of incorporates a Disneyland, Adventureland ride. So this book is all about the Tiki Room and has that whole Tiki Room incorporated into everything within the book. I'm a big Disneyland fan, so it was fun to read like all the little Easter eggs to different stuff from the Enchanted Tiki Room throughout the book. This book was also a very surprising book. It actually had a lot of violence in it, which was surprising to me. There's a scene near the end where adults are very menacing sometimes, kind of like the Roald Dahl effect, just kind of mean and clipped and not very kind. And so I was very curious about that, because in this book, that's kind of a turn that happens later in the book. It was a fun read. It's definitely a fantasy story. There's a lot of fantastical elements. The rest of the trilogy is fun too, but this was my favorite out of all 3 of them. The Key Master's Quest, book number 1 in the Tales from Adventureland series. Book number 8 is book number 1 in the Janitors series called Janitors by Tyler Whitesides. This is my hardback edition of this book. I actually have had this book for a long time, and this year I finally sat down to read it, and it was fun. It's a fantasy story that's kind of in the vein of the Percy Jackson books, similar to those kinds of middle grade fantasy fiction adventure stories where a kid discovers a magical world that's right under his nose, and this one has to do with janitors. And it's just fun because in this world, the janitors are fighting this war against invisible creatures that are trying to, destroy education. So it's a really interesting premise, and the janitors all have different tools that each have different magical abilities when no one is watching. So like a broom can sweep things away, or send a blast of air at people, and a mop can entangle people in the mop. And so it was just so much fun to see the different objects and what they did. Every time a new object came up, I thought, oh, what's this going to do? This book also has some great plot twists. I really enjoyed it. And I think it was just a fun read. If you're looking for something that's not too long, is just kind of, a great easy read, then pick up Janitors. If you've read Percy Jackson and really liked those, or Fablehaven, pick this one up. I'm actually a very big fan of Shadow Mountain books. There's a little logo there. They do the Fablehaven books. All of Brandon Mull's books usually are with Shadow Mountain. And I really like the editors over there must be who I really vibe with, because they do a lot of these kind of middle grade fantasy books. And so I usually enjoy them all. I've read a lot of them. I collect them. So this one is a great one. Sometime I'll have to do my Shadow Mountain collection. But this one is a great one. Janitors, book number 1 in the series. Book number 8 on my list this year. Then book number 7 is Janitors Book 2, Secrets of New Forest Academy by Tyler Whitesides. So this one is the sequel to Janitors. It's another hardback edition from the series. And this one, it just upped the ante. I really enjoyed it better than the first book because there was new things revealed, new things about the world, about what was happening, and I loved it. I read this book really fast because I really enjoyed it. I will admit there was a twist halfway through that I caught, and I thought, oh, I know what's going on here. This is this. But there were some other twists at the end of the book I did not see coming, and I always love it when a book surprises me. So this one definitely surprised me. The ending is a fun gauntlet type adventure set piece where the kids who are the main characters have to go through this series of traps, which I always love that in a fantasy book. I love them going through those sorts of things. So they have to get past this series of traps in order to find the MacGuffin of the book. And so it's a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. Can't recommend this Janitors series enough. So this is book number 7, Janitors, Secrets of New Forest Academy by Tyler Whitesides. And then book number 6, changing gears a tiny bit, but not much, is the Dark Sword Trilogy, book 2, Doom of the Dark Sword. This book is by Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman, and I this year decided, you know what, I have not read that much fantasy that's written for adults, and so I kind of was like poking around in some Facebook groups that I'm in for readers of fantasy fiction and sci-fi fiction, and asking like, what are some of your favorite older style fantasy books besides Lord of the Rings and those, because I've read Lord of the Rings already and I wanted something different. And so someone recommended this trilogy, the Dark Sword Trilogy, and I really enjoyed this book. Book number 2 really elevates what happens in book number 1. This series takes a lot of interesting turns, and it's set in a world where there is no technology. Magic is the only thing that's allowed to be used. Magic forms everything. So it forms everything from houses to cups to carriages. Like nothing is made without the use of magic. And so in book number 2, you have some characters who are on a quest who have no magic. Everyone else in this world has magic except for this one character in this book who is on a quest. And I will say, I'm not going to give any spoilers about it because I really enjoyed it quite a bit. At the very end, it was like non-stop flipping pages to see what was going to happen, because the last few pages of this book was it just really over the top amazing action sequence where there was a lot of danger and a lot of really intense moments, and I just had to know what was going to happen. And I will admit the book ended on a note that I did not expect. It left some really great questions opened, and so the whole time I was wondering, what is going to happen? I have actually not read book 3 yet, so we'll see if book 3 gets onto my list for 2024, because I'll probably be reading it next year. But this one is a great second entry in a series. I will say the middle of this book did kind of circle around a bit. The characters kind of went back to the same things a little bit over and over again for a while. But once I got past that, this was a great read. So that is book number 6, the Dark Sword Trilogy, book 2, Doom of the Dark Sword. And then coming in at number 5 is book number 1 in the Dark Sword Trilogy, Forging the Dark Sword. So this one is a little higher in my opinion than the first book, because this one had 2 opening twists that I loved. I was reading this book and I turned to my wife while I was reading it and I said, You have to listen to this. This is setting up this book series geniusly. Like, the world building in this first book has two major twists that I never saw coming. And I thought, well, that is very fascinating, especially for today's day and age, which this book was written in the 80s. And so for it to have a very interesting commentary on 2023 was a very big development to me, and I could not stop reading this book. I had to know what was going to happen. I will say, I do think at the very end, like maybe the last fourth of the book, there comes kind of a sequence of things that okay, they're going to do this, this, and this because this is probably going to happen. So I kind of read that part knowing like, okay, we're getting to this. Oh, yep. And now here's the next thing I expected and the next thing I expected. But it wasn't boring. It was just what I expected. So after those first two initial gasp out loud moments, the book just takes off and keeps going. This is a book written for adults. It's an adult fantasy. So it's not a YA book. It's not a middle grade book. It's an adult fantasy book. But it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it and had a great time reading it. And then book number 4, this actually has a little bit of a sad note to it, but book number 4 is Brother Wolf, book 4, Wolf's War by Joseph Delaney. So this is part of the Spooks Apprentice series. It's kind of a sequel series to those books by Joseph Delaney, and after he turned in this manuscript, Joseph Delaney actually passed away. So there will be no more books from him in this series. And I was kind of sad about that. I really have enjoyed these books. One interesting thing about the way Joseph Delaney wrote was he was a discovery writer. And so he would write books and as he went along kind of discovered what would happen in the plot. So he'd have a basic idea of what he wanted to have happen and then just discovered the rest of it while he wrote, which I can kind of tell a little bit in this book that there was not a lot of time to go back to Joseph Delaney because he turned in the manuscript and passed away shortly afterwards. So the editing rounds were not able to take through and kind of maybe work out a few of the tweaks that maybe needed to happen to make the story flow a little more and end up being the story that it is, but it still was a quick, fun read. I enjoyed it a lot. These books are kind of spooky and scary, and in this one it deals with Loki as the main villain. So Loki, being a trickster, has a lot of fun tricks up his sleeve against the main character Wolf, who is trying to stop him from taking over the world, all those sorts of normal things that villains like to do in fantasy stories. But this one, Wolf's War, was a lot of fun to read, and it is the last book in this series. So I've read them all. And like I said, I'm a little sad about that. But this is number 4 on my list, book number 4 of Brother Wolf, Wolf's War by Joseph Delaney. And then book number 3 on my list. This took a while. I moved some books around quite a few times, and I just moved this one up, and I was asking myself, is this recency bias? But I don't think so. I really did enjoy this book. Book number 3 is R.L. Stine's Fear Street, book number 10, Ski Weekend. I had a lot of fun reading this book. Like I said, I have a book review of this book if you want to hear more about it, but it was a lot less gory than I thought it was going to be. I didn't know how much violence there would be, but there wasn't much violence at all. It was actually just a lot of fun and a good eerie mystery. Ski Weekend is a lot of fun. Book number 3 on my list for top 2023 fiction books I read this year. So book number 2 is book number 1 in the Greater Land Saga, The Bygone Dagger by Joseph R. Lallo. Now, this book, I devoured this book. This year, I really wanted to read some more books by independent authors. And so Joseph R. Lallo is an independent author who's written a lot of different things. The main series he's known for is a series called The Book of Deacon, which I have not read yet, but I wanted to read something that looked interesting, but was an independently published book. And so I read The Bygone Dagger, and I am so glad I did. This book was incredible. It had so much mystery. It had a great fantasy world. The characters were a lot of fun and held back a lot of good secrets, but not in an annoying way where you're like, I've got a secret, but I'm not going to tell you because we don't have enough time, sort of stuff. I hate that in a book. And this was much more like little secrets are revealed as it goes to different characters. And the story is all about this family who are kind of like tinkerers, who they fix up ancient objects and make them so that people can buy them in their curiosity shop. And the son in this family goes out to retrieve these items, and he often goes to this place called the Wall. And the Wall is a place where there's a lot of different like libraries of different things in them, of different old items left over from this bygone era. That's a long time past. There's not a lot known about it. There's not a lot known about how the people made these objects that have a little bit of magic to them, but they're technological. And so he goes and finds them. Well, he finds a few items that a lot of people are after, because there is much more going on in the world than this family knows about, and the story just takes off from there. I'm not going to say anything else because I would not want to spoil it. This book was such a fun book to read. Like I said, I devoured it. I was so quickly going through the pages as I read and read and read and read and could not stop. So book number 2 is The Bygone Dagger, book number 1 in the Greater Land Saga by Joseph R. Lallo. And now we've come to it. What was my favorite book of 2023? Out of all the books I read, and I believe, a lot of books. So I read quite a few fiction books this year. So my number 1 pick for my favorite fiction book of 2023 is The Bygone Archive, book 2 in the Greater Lands Saga. This book took what happened in the first book and just elevated it even more. There was more mystery, there was more intrigue. You find out some world-altering things about this whole fantasy world that I thought, well, now I am highly invested. I want to know what's going on with that. The adventure is top-notch. There's so many awesome mystical creatures in this book. Like, it just had everything that a fantasy reader loves, if you're a fantasy reader like me at least. I love that good MacGuffin mystery where they're searching for something. I love it when there's like interesting creatures throughout the world. I love it when there's a mystery of some kind that's involved in everything. Ancient secrets about different stuff that you don't find out about and as the book unfolds. I loved this book. There also was such an interesting element of just dread that was added in, because you find out some things about objects that this family has collected that you're wondering, when is that going to come into play? Because that is a little bit eerie. What is going on there? So it was just so much fun to read this book. It was my favorite book of the year. I can't say anything else about it because it just was so good. It had everything. The pacing was wonderful. The characters are incredible. It had good mystery. All the things I love in a book, they were in this book. So if you've never read the Greater Land Saga, highly recommend. They are so good. I will be reading more of them in 2024. There's 6 books total in the series so far, because I believe he's still writing some. So definitely a series worth checking out. The Greater Land Saga by Joseph R. Lallo. The first book is The Bygone Dagger. Book 2, The Bygone Archive. So those are my top 10 favorite fiction books of 2023. What are your favorite fiction books you read this year? Put them down in the comments below. I'd love to see what kind of books you're reading, what kind of books you enjoy, and what your favorites were this year. If there's any that you found that I haven't heard of, or I'd love to put them on my list. So if you've read any of these books too, let me know. I'd love to find out when people have read this stuff. It's just so much fun to talk about. So anyways, that's all for now for 2023's fiction books. But check back soon for more from the Shaun Stevenson Books channel. And until then, keep reading. Bye, everybody.